Alright, Daf Kuf Vav, this is Friday's Daf. And the Gemara is going through different memories from Abaya that may reish havamina, what I used to think, and then I was corrected. So let's pick it up about 13 lines from the bottom of Kuf Hamid Beis. V'yomer Abaya may reish havi amina, hai de lo yaste tusi marziva. The reason why people wouldn't sit under a drain pipe is mishum sheifchen, because it's gross and the dirty water's pouring on them. But Omer Limar, mishum deshchichi mazikin, because it's a place where mazikin hang out. And case in point, the following story. Hanu shekayle de have daru chavisa de chamra. There were these two workers carrying a barrel of wine. They want to take a rest, and they put the barrel underneath a drain pipe, where wouldn't you know it, there was a shade hanging out there. Paka, and therefore the shade broke the barrel. So these workers came to Bezdin, to Mar Baravashi, to be teveya the money from the shade. I guess back in the day, they had a different relationship with Shadim, and they were actually going to be teveya for money. I mean, it's interesting they were going to deal with the Shadim in kind of a business sense, but they do say sometimes it could be a shady business. Womp womp. So Omer Le Mar Baravashi said to the shade, Amai tavin achi, why'd you break their barrel? Omer Le zok the shade, Hechi yavid ki aisve ba'unai. What do you want from my life? They put the barrel in my unai, in my ear when I was sleeping. In other words, they put the barrel in my space. So Omer Le zok Mar Baravashi, At peduchta d'shchichi rabbi mabois. What are you doing in a public area? Atu d'shanis. You're the one who was mishana and did the wrong thing by being where you weren't supposed to be. And therefore, zil shalim, you should go pay for the cost of the barrel. Amalei zok the shade back to Mar Baravashi. Hashtanami likba limar zimna ve'efra. Okay, give me a time when I gotta pay. I gotta have some time to collect the money, and then I'll pay. Kavolei zimne. So Mar Baravashi gave him a time. Kimota zimne iake. But when the time came, wouldn't you know it? Can never trust the shadim. The shade did not show up to pay. So Kiyosa Amalei, when he finally came, Mar Baravashi said, Amai loy osis bezimnach. Why didn't you show up when you were supposed to? To pay. Amalei zok the shade. I couldn't come up with the money because called mili detzayer the chosim v'kayil money less labor shusa lemishkomine. Anything that is wrapped or sealed or counted, we're not allowed to be naig with it. Ad mishkachina midi de hefkera, until we could find something that has no owner. Because we know that a bracha is not going to be shayra on something that's not sama mina'ayin, and a shade has no control over things that are too misudder, because then it'll become like more of a nes nigla once you start seeing the fact that the numbers have changed. So he had to wait to find hefker, and then he was able to collect the money. V'yomer abaya mereish have. I mean, I used to think hi deshadi maya mipum dechatva. This that people spill out some water in the beginning of a pitcher before they drink from it. That's mishum tzivsa, because back in the day the water wasn't so clean. There were little pieces of splinters of wood in there, and therefore you'd always pour off a little bit of that which would float to the top in order to make it safer to drink for the health concerns of not drinking little splinters. That's why they would pour it off. But Omer Limar, then I got to hear mishum diika mayim aroyim, because there's an idea of mayim aroyim, meaning there's some sort of mazikim, because if the shadim drink from the water, I don't want to drink from that same water the shadim drink, so I pour off a little bit first. And now we have a story for that. Hahu bar sheda, there was this shade to have a bay Rav Papa that used to work at Rav Papa's house. Rashi says he was mishamshe. So Rav Papa had Slim Shady over here as his mishares. So ozal asuye mayim and hara. So this shade went down to the river to get some water for the Papa family. Iakev, but he took a long time before he came back. So Ikiyos, when he finally showed up, Amrulay, they asked the shade, Amai Iakvat, what took you so long? So Amrulhu, he said back to them, Ad dechalfi mayim aroyim. I was waiting until the bad water passed by, because I didn't want to take from the water that the other shadim were drinking from. Adahachi, meanwhile, moving over to Tamid Aleph, I saw that you guys were spilling out water from the pitchers anyway, and therefore taking care of the problem. So Amri, had I known that you had the minig anyway to pour out some of the water from your pitchers, so I wouldn't have waited for the river water that the shadim were drinking from to pass, because even if I would have taken that quote-unquote bad water, you would have poured some of it out. Taisus interestingly asks, why didn't the shade himself just take care of this by pouring off some of the water? And Taisus is one of two reasons. Either is because he didn't want the shade to make the other shadim angry that he was kind of giving away the shadim's secrets, or because perhaps pouring off the water from the pitcher only helps for the person who's actually doing the drinking, not for somebody else. Okay, but now back to our show about Mayim Rishonim and Mayim Achronim. Ki Yosef Rav Dimi Omar Mayim Rishonim he'echilu basar chazer. A person who does not wash the Mayim Achronim caused somebody to eat chazer. And Achronim, another person's lack of actually doing Mayim Achronim, caused a person to lose their wife. And Rashi tells us the story because there was once a chenvani that didn't see a guy washing the til sidaim, so he assumed he was a guy, and therefore he fed him chazer. And the other story, which is referencing the Gemara in Yuma, where a person who didn't wash their mayim achreinim, who was assumed not to be Jewish, and the reason they assumed he wasn't washing his hands is because they saw the lentil beans on his mustache, and a person who doesn't clean off their mustache and stomach is not also washing their hands. And this fellow Kedor, who had taken money from Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, so then they went and confronted his wife. He got mad at her. He either killed her or divorced her. Anyway, that's the whole story going on in Yuma, and this is what our Gemara is referencing when it says achreinim etziu es ish mibayla. Ki yasa Rav and Omar Amar, Rishayim Echilu Basar Nevela, V'achreinim Hargu Es HaNefesh. Person who didn't wash Mayim Rishayim was fed Nevela, meaning Nevela as opposed to Chazer, and Achreinim Eitziu Es Ish Mebaila, but by not washing Mayim Achreinim is a reference to that story that a husband lost his wife. Ki Yasa Rav and Amar, Rishayim Echilu Basar Nevela, V'achreinim Hargu Es HaNefesh. That he actually killed his wife because he was so mad at her. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak V'Simanach, and how do you know which one said which, meaning Rav and Rav Dimi, because also Rav Dimi Afke, also Rav and Katle. Rav Dimi came first, so he said that her husband just got rid of her. Rav came afterwards and said that her husband killed her, because it has to be the sequence of events, since you can't kill somebody after you're dead. Rabbi Abba Masni Chada Mehani V'Chada Mehani L'Chumra. Both of these things were taught L'Chumra according to Rabbi Abba, meaning the Chazer is more Chomer than the Nevela, which Rashi very interestingly says that Basar Chazer is Chomer min Nevela, the Ispe Trei Isuri, because you not only have the Isser of Chazer, but you also have the regular Isser of Nevela. A Shrita can never help to be matter a Chazer. So you have two Isurim. I ein Isser Chal al Isser, so L'Chaira, if you're telling me that there is an Isser Nevela, how does Isser Chazer Chal on it? So it could be Rashi's taking sides in the Shaila of maybe there is an Isser, even when you say ein Isser Chal Isser, it's just that we're not nanash for it. And there could be Nafkamina still Lagabe where the Kvura takes place. L'Kaivre ben Rishayim Gemurim. Itmar, Chame Ha'or. Let's say you have water that's heated up with a fire. So Chizkiya Omar ein Neitlin Mehen Le'yadayim. You can't use it for Netilas Yadayim. Now Chizkiya, who Rashi points out is a Tana, is actually arguing with the Gemara beforehand. Beforehand we said you could use it for Netilas Yadayim. Zok Chizkiya, you can't use it for Netilas Yadayim. Taisus doesn't go for that. Taisus says we're talking about different levels of heat. That Chizkiya says you can't use is actually really burning, hot, scalding water. But the Gemara beforehand was only talking about warm water. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, Neitlin Mehen Le'yadayim, you could. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Sha'alti Yisrael Gamliel b'nai Shel Rebbe, v'oichel taharais, because he was a parish that only ate chulin b'tahara, v'amar li, and he said, Kol Gedolei Golil, Eisen Kain, that all the Gedolim from Golil would do this, meaning would wash with hot water. So the Smag brings from the Yam Shel Shloimeh that you see like Rashi, because Rashi learns that Chizkiya is arguing, and therefore that's why this was okay. If you learn like Taisus, that we're only talking here about scalding water, it's not Mistabra, that Kol Gedolei Golil we're only using scalding water. Okay, weiter. Chame Tiveria, as opposed to water that's heated up with fire, now we have naturally hot water. Chame Tiveria. So Chizkiya Omar ein Neitlin Mehen Liyadayim. You can't use them for Netilas Yadayim. Avol Matbilin Behen Beyadayim. Sure, you don't use them to wash your hands like for Netilas Yadayim, pouring it out of a cup, but you can be toivel. The big nafkamina between Netila and Tevila is Netila requires a revius of water, but Tevila requires 40 saw, a much bigger amount. For Rabbi Yechanan Amar, Kol Gufay Tevel Behen, you can put your whole body in that kind of water. Avol Le'panav Yodav V'Raglav. Frank the Gemara, what are you talking about? Hashta Kol Gufay Tevel Behen. If you're telling me that you can use Chame Tiveria as a kosher mikveh for your whole body, so Panav Yodav V'Raglav like Kol Shkein, you can't use it for your face, hands, and your feet? Omar of Papa, no. B'mkayman de Kuli Amalei Pligi Deshari. Avada the Chame Tiveria in the hole in the ground that contains the Arboim saw. Avada that's a kosher mikveh. You can go into both Chizkiya, Rabbi Yechanan, everybody's maskim. You can be toivel your yadayim and eat from the Chametz Veria b'mkayman. But mishkal minayu b'mana, mi'idach kisa, if you take Chametz Veria and put it into a keli and then pour those over your hands, that's certainly not going to work. Interestingly enough, that's going to be worse, because even though Chametz Veria is going to be kosher for tevilas yadayim, it's still going to be puzzle for netilas yadayim, because Chazal never intended that to be the right kind of water for the netila. But kipligi, where is Chizkiya and Rabbi Yechanan going to have a machlekes? De paskinu bebas birta. Let's say part of the mikvah's water went into a small tributary, small channel that went off to the side. So it doesn't have our boim saw, but it's still connected to that source mikvah. And therefore, the question is, how do we look at this bas birta? Mar sover gazrinan bas birta otumana, umar sover le gazrinan, whether or not it makes such a gzeira. Kitanai, and this machlekes Chizkiya and Rabbi Yechanan is telling the machlekes Tanaim, mayim shenifsul mishtias behema, let's say water that became not shaykh for an animal to drink because it was so gross or because it was too hot. Bekalim, if they're in a keli, psulim, they're puzzle for netilas yadayim to make your hands tar. Bekarka, but if that same water is in the karka, then it'll be ksherim. Ben Elazar Omer, af bekarka, even in the ground, taiva bohen kol gufa, you can put your whole body in it. In other words, it's perfectly kosher for tevila. Avoloi panav yodav v'raglov, but not face, hands, and feet, and therefore the hands, etc., will not be tahar. Yodav v'raglov, by the way, might be lav dafka, because really the only issue that we have to be matar are the hands. So, frak the Gemara, hashta kol gufa taiva bohen yodav v'raglov kol shkein, same kasha. El alad the paskinu b'basbirta, we must be talking about a basbirta issue. Ubaha pligi, the mar savar gazrina basbirta otumana, umar savar le gazrinan. Okay, Omer Rav Idi bar Oven, Omer Rav Yitzchak bar Ashyan. Netilas yadayim l'chulin mipnei srach truma. Why do we wash our hands when we do netilas yadayim? Why are we doing that? The reason is because the Kohanim had to do this before they ate truma, and therefore Chazal went ahead and said you should always do it, even if you're not a kohen and you're not eating truma. Do it even for chulin mipnei srach truma. So this way, meheri yabana beis hamikdash, and everybody is molumid, including the Kohanim, to make sure to wash their hands. It's very interesting. I heard that every time we wash our hands for Netilas Yadayim, you should be thinking about Mashiach, because the whole reason we wash our hands before we make Hamaitzi is because we're hoping soon the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, and the Kohanim need to wash their hands before they eat the Truma, and therefore we're creating this culture of washing your hands for that reason. But that's really it. It's because we believe the Beis HaMikdash will be built soon. So why do we wash Netilas Yadayim L'chulin? That's Mipnei Srach Truma v'oid mishum mitzvah. For the Gemara, my mitzvah, what kind of mitzvah are we talking about? There is no pasuk in the Torah that says you got to wash your hands before bread. Omar Baya, mitzvah lishmaya divrei chachamim. That's what we're talking about, because Chazal said you should wash your hands. Rava Omar mitzvah lishmaya divrei Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. What did Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch say? Tichsev v'chol asher yiga boy hazav v'yodav le'shataf b'mayim. That the zav will be tamei. Omar Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. Mikan samchu chachamim l'netilas yadayim en atayra. That's his asmachta to teach us netilas yadayim. Omar le Rava l'Rav Nachman. My mashma. What do you see in the pasuk? Tichsev v'yodav le'shataf b'mayim. He didn't wash his hands in water, he'll be tamei. But hashataf tar. It sounds like based on this pasuk, if the person who touched the zav washed his hands, he'll be tar. But hotvila boy, washing your hands doesn't cut it. You got to actually go into a mikveh. Elahachi ka'amar va'achar shaloi shatav tamei. Someone who touches the zav, and also another person that we're talking about who didn't wash his hands, he'll be tamei. But that's we're talking about the person who didn't wash his hands before he ate bread. Amar Rebbe Lazar, Amar Rabbi Aishia. Le amru netilas yadayim leperes el mishum nikias. The whole reason we're supposed to wash our hands is only because of nikias, which by the way is the reason why there's no gasas haruach. If your hands are not clean, avadi, you have to wash your hands before you eat. This of course is good Pesach Seder Torah. Why do we wash our hands before karpas? Even if it's gasei haruach, even if it's gasas haruach, maybe because we're acting like bnei chayrin that night. Ayin, your son's 6th grade notes from his Rebbe. Sover Minei, based on this psak, they had thought that chayva hudaleka, there's no chiyav to wash your hands for Paris, like there is by bread, but ha mitzvah ika, there's just a mitzvah to do it, meaning it's a nice thing to do. Amar lahu Rava, no, le chayva v'le mitzvah el rishus. It's mamish optional to wash your hands before Paris. Upligi de Rav Nachman, di Amar Rav Nachman anoitel yodav leParis eina ella megase haruach. Amar Rabba Babarchana have ka'imna kamei de Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Yasi. When I was in front of them, they brought a basket of fruit, and they ate it, but they didn't wash their hands before they ate the fruit. And they also didn't give me anything to eat from that basket, and they each benched separately by themselves. So Shama Mina, Tlas, I learned 3 halachas from there. Number 1, Shema Mina, ein netilas yadayim leperes. You don't have to wash your hands before Paris, only for bread. Ushma Mina, ein mezamnin al Paris. You don't make a zimun for Paris, because otherwise they wouldn't have benched independently. Ushma Mina, shnayim shachlu, when 2 people eat together, mitzvah lechalek, don't have one be mitzi the other one, but each one should bench independently. Tanya nami hachi, shnayim shachlu, mitzvah lechalek, but bamed devar memurim, that's shahayu shnayim seifrim, when both of them are talmidei chacham that know how to bench. Aval echad seifer v'echad bur, seifer umavarech ubur yaitze. One should be mitzi, the other one better to be yaitze than to mess up the benching. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a brisa, netilas yadayim l'chulin ad haparak. How far should you wash your hands? Wash until the first knuckles. Lit truma, when you wash your hands for truma, turning over tamid beis ad haparak, which is until the middle joint, meaning the knuckles moving further towards your wrist. And then kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, but migdash, when they would have to do that water and pour from the kiyar in the beis hamigdash, that would be ad haparak. That's until the wrist, even though it's the same word parak, but it means different things in different places. And of course, speaking as a kohen, there's always that wild feeling on Yom Kippur when they wash your hands all the way to your wrists. It's like, holy cow, in Yom Kippur you're washing your hands to your wrist. Because sure, Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, but Migdash is all the way to the wrist. And v'chol davar shechaytis b'tefila b'guf, and anything that would normally act as a chatzitza on the body, chaytis b'netilas Yadayim l'chulin b'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim b'Migdash. Same halacha of chatzitza. Now, Amar Rav will do a demonstration over here. Ad kan l'chulin, v'ad kan l'truma. Here's where you wash until for chulin and truma, meaning the knuckles, based on the brisa we just said. Ushmul Amar ad kan bein l'chulin bein l'truma. It's the same set of knuckles, not 2 different levels of knuckles here. And he would say more l'chumra. You got to wash more. And Rav Sheshes Amar ad kan bein l'chulin bein l'truma l'kula. Both chulin and truma would only need the lesser amount of water, meaning the higher up knuckles. Omer bar Hedya, have a ka'imna kamei de Rabbi Ami, the Omer ad kan bein l'chulin bein l'truma. L'chumra, meaning the further down knuckles according to Shmuel. V'lai tema Rabbi Ami mishum dekainu. And don't say that Rabbi Ami was more machmer because he was a kayin, and therefore he was more nahug to eat truma, and therefore that's why he was more machmer even l'gabe chulin, and therefore you might think he'd be maskim that other people don't need to wash to the lower knuckle. To Rabbi Meshaya bar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who Levoi, he was a Levi who didn't eat any truma, v'omar, but still he said ad kan bein l'chulin ben l'truma, he was still machmer l'chumra. We of course lahalacha are noyeg to wash until your wrists, and of course you have to wash until your wrists if your hands are dirty, but the Mishnah Berurah does bring that if you don't have enough water, b'di eved, you don't have to wash all the way to your wrists. We of course are noyeg to always try to wash to our wrists. And we're going to stop here and pick it up with Shabbos' Daf by Omer Rav.